Hello everyone and welcome to a special episode of Cut Rate Commander, that being the 10k subscriber giveaway, the series where we take a look at low price commanders, make budget decks with them, and this time, give you the chance to win them. My name is Grazzet, and today the commander I selected to celebrate the channel's 10k subscriber milestone is the long-awaited Myr Tribal commander, Urtet, Remnant of Memnarch, which we'll be building on an increased budget of $100. But before we continue to the build, I would first like to take an opportunity to thank each and every one of the subscribers who made this milestone possible. Without you, we would have never gotten here, so sincerely, thank you all for all of your support these past 2 years. Now, as usual, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to help keep the channel growing and, more importantly, to unlock some sweet upgrades for the build to make it even better, which we'll be going over at the end of the video along with how to enter, so be sure to stick around. So, with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Urtet, Remnant of Memnarch is a 3/3 artifact creature Myr that costs 3 and has the following abilities. Firstly, whenever we cast a Myr spell, we create a 1/1 colorless Myr artifact creature token. Secondly, at the beginning of combat on our turn, we untap each Myr we control. And lastly, we can pay Wooburg and tap Urtet to put 3+1/+1 counters on each Myr we control, which we may only activate during our turn. Breaking down his core stats, Urtet is sporting a relatively low CMC, a slightly below average stat block for his cost, and a trio of abilities that are focused around flooding the board with Myr, then using said Myr to generate value or to power them up to make them even more lethal in combat. Taking a closer look at his first ability, it simply tacks on a free 1/1 Myr artifact creature to every single Myr spell we cast, passively allowing us to inundate the board with additional tribe members and artifacts as we cast our tribal spells, both of which have plenty of payoffs to take advantage of them. Then moving on to his second ability, it more or less serves as a tribal unwinding clock that triggers at the beginning of our combat phase, which at first may seem a bit awkward to take advantage of, but we have to remember that Myr have plenty of mana dorks in their ranks that can use this to double the ramp they provide. Urtet untaps himself with this ability to allow us to activate his last ability twice per turn, and since we have access to all 5 colors, we have access to plenty of ways to tap down our own creatures for other effects that we can get double the use out of if we're creative. And finally, Urtet's last ability allows him to take all the Myr we've been summoning and the Myr tokens that he, and likely other sources, have been creating and to turn them into massive threats that we can make bigger and bigger with each passing turn, which turns him into a powerful tribal pseudo-lord that can take our numerous but typically weak Myr and to turn them into a deadly fighting force quite quickly. So, as we can see, Urtet is clearly a Myr tribal commander whose goal is to flood the board with Myr and Myr tokens, then use those Myr to generate value and slam them into our opponents. So it should come as no surprise that we're taking this build in a Myr tribal and artifact focused direction to take advantage of that, as well as splashing in a number of ways for us to take advantage of our commander's free tribal untap per turn. On the Myr tribal and artifact side of things, we'll of course be running a wide array of Myr to trigger and be empowered by our commander, ranging from mana generating Myr that Urtet gets extra uses out of, to token creating Myr to help us get even more bodies on board, which we'll support with various Myr centric artifacts to get us even more Myr tokens into play, and generic artifact support to get us value as we cast or play them. Then, on the untapping side of things, we'll be running plenty of effects with Improvise and similar effects to allow us to use our vanilla Myr as pseudo-mana dorks to help cast them, as well as effects that allow us to tap down our Myr for even more value and utility, alongside a handful of ways to bounce our relatively cheap Myr back to hand so we can recast them and reproc Urtet and all our other artifact and tribal payoffs, ensuring we always have the resources and bodies necessary to turn our Myr into a deadly if somewhat adorable army. So let's planeswalk our way back yet again to New Phyrexia and meet Urtet, a remnant of Mirrodin's bygone age. He, like all of his kind, was created by Memnarch to fulfill a singular purpose, in his case to collect scrap metal that was to be used to create more of his kind, and nearly 2 centuries later that has not changed, occasionally being seen by Mirran rebels in scrap heaps and long abandoned ruins silently salvaging components. It was one such rebel scavenger who happened to be salvaging long dead levelers in the wastes and noticed the Myr nearby doing the same, who jokingly asked it why it was still doing this after centuries. Then, much to the rebel's shock, Urtet paused his work for a moment and, unlike any previous Myr before him, spoke.
"Mia will go where the work is,"
he said as he began sorting through the scrap metal again.
"We always have, we always will."
So, now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's start looking at the deck itself by starting with the creatures. Jumping right into the CMC2 slot, we start off with the Myr Mana Dorks, Gold Myr, Silver Myr, Leaden Myr, Iron Myr, and Copper Myr, all of which are 1/1s that we can tap to generate a white, blue, black, red, or green mana respectively, making them all solid sources of ramp on their own, but Urtet's untapping effect allowing us to get double the use out of them per turn to speed up our mana base even further. Similarly, but with a poison twist, we'll also be running Plague Myr and Myr Convert as additional ramp sources, the former being a 1/1 with Infect that we can tap for a colorless, and the latter being a 2/1 with Toxic 1 that we can pay 2 life and tap to produce a mana of any color. Again, serving as additional Myr that can take advantage of our commander's untap effect to generate even more mana, with the former also turning into a very real threat as we load it up with counters thanks to its built-in Infect, while the latter's fixing can more easily enable us to activate Urtet's AoE counter distribution and grow our board. Then briefly staying on the poison game plan for a moment, we'll also be adding Ichor Claw Myr to our ranks, a 1/1 with Infect that, if blocked, gains +2/+2 until end of turn, which like Plague Myr can quickly become a dangerous threat once our commander starts loading it up with counters, rapidly growing into 2-shot range if our opponents are unable to deal with it. From there, it's on to a trio of Myr with on-death triggers, those being Myr Retriever, Myr Sire, and Perilous Myr. Myr Retriever is a 1/1 that, when it dies, returns another target artifact from our graveyard back to hand, providing the build with the means to recur a wide selection of powerful targets that may have been previously destroyed to be used again, all while our commander grows it in the meantime. Myr Sire is another 1/1 that, when it's put into the graveyard from the battlefield, creates a 1/1 Myr artifact creature token, which again gives us another cheap tribe member to trigger and grow with our commander, which, upon death, leaves behind another tribal body for us to continue to use. Perilous Myr is yet another 1/1 that, when it dies, deals 2 damage to any target, this time serving as a shock on a cheap tribal body that we can use to remove small utility creatures, ding planeswalkers, or just hit face as retribution if it dies. And then as our final Myr entrant in this slot, we have Hover Myr, a 1/2 flyer with Vigilance. It's built-in evasion, allowing it to benefit even more from us growing it by bypassing most blockers, while its Vigilance allows us to still keep it up to block any crackback that comes our way. Then moving on to our non-Myr entrants in this slot, we have the artifacts Enthusiastic Mechanaut and Ethereum Sculptor, both of which reduce the cost of all our artifact spells by 1, the former being a 2/2 flyer and the latter being a 1/2. The cost reduction they provide are already cheap Myr, allowing us to cast them more often and sometimes even for free, which is spectacular to grow our board quickly and to trigger our commander and other payoffs more frequently. And lastly, as our final pair of creature entrants in this slot, we have the Flesh and Blood entrants Myrsmith and Drofna, founder of Latinum. Myrsmith is a 2/1 that, whenever we cast an artifact spell, lets us pay 1 to create a 1/1 Myr artifact creature token, taking full advantage of our high artifact spell count to get even more Myr onto the battlefield for our commander to empower at a relatively low cost. Drofna is also a 2/1 that lets us pay 1 in a blue to return target artifact we control to our hand, in addition to letting us pay 3 and tap him to copy target artifact spell. His first ability allowing us to bounce our cheaper Myr back to hand so they can be recast, re-triggering our commander and other artifact payoffs as we do so, while his repeatable artifact copying effect can allow us to get extra copies of our Myr or our various other artifacts into play to build up our board even further. Then proceeding to the CMC3 slot, we'll be jumping right back on the Myr ramp game plan with its first 2 entrants, Palladium Myr and Alloy Myr, both of which are 2/2s that we can tap for mana, the former tapping for 2 colorless and the latter tapping for a mana of any color, again providing us with a solid boost to our mana base that only gets better as our commander gets us extra uses out of them. Then quickly running down our remaining Myr in this slot, we have Myr Progenitor, a 1/1 that we can pay 3 and tap to create a token copy of itself, which makes it a decent way to get additional tribe members on board so long as we're able to pump mana into the original and its copies. Myr Galvanizer, a 2/2 that gives all Myr we control +1/+1 and lets us pay 1 and tap it to untap all other Myr we control, making it a decent tribal lord and, more importantly, allowing us to untap all our Myr 2 more times alongside our commander to get us even more value out of them. Shimmer Mirror, a 2/2 with flash that lets us cast artifact spells at flash speed, enabling the majority of our deck to play around our opponent's removal and wipes, as well as granting the mirror we cast and create on our opponent's turn pseudo haste so they can swing in or be tapped down when the turn gets back to us. Mirror Custodian, a 2/3 that lets us scry 2 when it ETBs and lets all our opponents scry 1. The fact that it's a tribe member with a decent stat block procs our payoffs and provides solid ETB card selection, making it worth running in spite of the card selection it provides our opponents. Knighted Mirror, a 2/2 with Adapt 1 for 2 and a white, that, whenever it has a counter put on it, gains double strike until the end of the turn, our commander easily being able to trigger its double strike turn after turn and enabling it to do huge chunks of damage to our opponents as it swings in. Sun-Touched Mirror, a 0/0 with Sunburst, generally making it a 3/3 for 3 in this build, which is about as good as it gets for mirror stat blocks, so we'll run it. And Darksteel Mirror, a 0/1 with Indestructible, which serves as a decent blocker initially, and later, as our commander starts growing it, turns into an incredibly resilient threat that our opponents will have a hard time dealing with conventional removal. And then to wrap up the tribal entries in this slot, we have 2 Honorary Mirror in the form of Bloodline Pretender and Mirror Entity. Bloodline Pretender is a 2/2 with Changeling that, when it ETBs, has us choose a creature type, and then, whenever a creature of the chosen type ETBs under our control, gains a +1/+1 counter. Its combination of Changeling and being an artifact, allowing it to proc and benefit from both our tribal and artifact payoffs, while its tribal counter generation enables it to grow into a massive threat very quickly as we swarm our board with Mirror. Mirror Entity is a 1/1 with Changeling that lets us pay X2 until end of turn, have all creatures we control have base power and toughness XX, and gain all creature types. This time only benefiting from our tribal payoffs, but making up for it by allowing us to cheaply turn our entire board into Mirror to benefit from our commander's untapping and counter distribution, or alternatively to use any excess mana we don't siphon into Urtet to pump up our board even further. It's then on to our non-mirrors, with Foundry Inspector joining us as the penultimate entry in this lot, being a 3/2 that reduces the cost of all our artifact spells by 1, which again allows us to get more artifacts into play faster and proc our payoffs more often. And finally, we have Lachelle Clockwork Scholar wrapping up the CMC 3 slot, a 3/3 that prevents all combat damage that would be dealt to attacking artifact creatures we control, and, whenever one or more artifact creatures ETB under our control, draws us a card, limited to once each turn. Her offensive damage prevention allowing our mirror to swing in without fear of dying to blockers, while her easily triggered draw will generally net us at least 1 extra card per rotation, and possibly even more when combined with flash speed casting and or token creation to keep our hands nicely topped off. The CMC 4 slot is then up next, which will start off with our only 2 tribe members in the slot, Lodestone Mirror and Mirror Kinsmith. Lodestone Mirror is a 2/2 with Trample that lets us tap an untapped artifact we control to give it +1/+1 until end of turn. Its built-in Trample combined with our capability to flood our board with Mirror and untapping them once per turn for free, allowing it to crash in for staggering amounts of damage. And that's before our commander even has the opportunity to load it up with counters and make it even bigger. Mirror Kinsmith is a 3/1 that, when it ETBs, lets us search our deck for any mirror card, reveal it, and put it into our hand, making it a solid tribal tutor that, when combined with our means to bounce our creatures back to hand, we can use multiple times per game to search up our best tribe members while proccing Urtet and all our other payoffs as it does so for even more value. Speaking of bouncing creatures back to hand, we'll also be running Master Transmuter, a 1/2 that lets us pay a blue and tap it to return an artifact we control back to its owner's hand and then let us put an artifact from our hand into play, allowing us to repeatedly swap out our cheap mirror for our most expensive artifacts and then recast them to reproc all our triggers again. And lastly, closing out this slot, we have the Legends Joyra Weatherlight Captain and a Belisarius Call. Joyra is a 3/3 that, whenever we cast a historic spell, draws us a card, easily and continually generating us card advantage as we cast the majority of our deck to ensure our hands remain nice and full. Belisarius is a 2/4 that we can either tap and tap 2 untapped artifacts we control to create a 2/2 with Vigilance, or instead we can tap and tap X untapped creatures we control to look at the top X cards of our deck, revealing an artifact from among them, putting it into our hand, and sending the rest to the bottom of our deck in a random order, which will be running primarily for his second ability, allowing us to use our mirror to dig deeply into our deck for our best artifacts at no mana cost, though his token creation is still serviceable in case we need more bodies on board despite them not being tribe members or artifacts. Then moving on to the CMC 5 slot, we have its singular entrant, Canoptek Spider, a 4/4 flyer that, whenever a non-token artifact, creature, or vehicle ETBs under our control, draws us a card, again providing us with another source of continual card advantage as we cast, bounce, and recast our mirror and other artifacts, all on a decently sized evasive artifact body to boot. Nearly at the end now, the first half of the CMC 6 slot brings us Brutaclad Telcor Engineer, a 4/4 that gives all token creatures we control haste, and, at the beginning of combat on our turn, creates a 2/1 mirror artifact creature token, then lets us choose a token we control, allowing us to turn all our other tokens into a copy of that token, serving as an additional source of mirror tokens to help build up our board, a way to turn our 1/1 mirror tokens into 2/1s to have them punch a bit harder, and ensuring that all the tokens we create are able to swing in the turn they come into play to further increase our damage potential, which all combine to make him an overall solid addition to the build. The second half of the CMC 6 slot then closes out with Shimmer Dragon, a 5/6 flyer that, so long as we control 4+ artifacts, has hexproof, and lets us tap 2 untapped artifacts we control to draw a card. The sheer amount of card advantage it can generate for us per rotation being absolutely absurd, allowing it to easily reload our hand several times over on top of being untargetable by our opponent's effects 99% of the time, all the while possessing a massive evasive stat block that allows it to easily crack in for damage alongside our army of Mirror. And finally, reaching the CMC 7 slot and our last 2 tribe members, we have Mirror Battlesphere and Mirror Enforcer. Mirror Battlesphere is a 4/7 that, when it ETBs, creates 4 1/1 Mirror artifact creature tokens and, when it attacks, lets us tap X untapped Mirror we control to give it +X/+O until end of turn and have it deal X damage to the player or planeswalker it's attacking, giving us 5 tribe members for the price of 1 that we can bounce to make even more, and, if we so choose, we can use its ability as we swing in to burn our opponents to death thanks to our army of Mirror before blockers are even declared. Mirror Enforcer is a 4/4 with affinity for artifacts, generally making it a free 4/4 tribe member in this build, which is a fantastic rate and a great way for us to proc all our payoffs without having to spend a single mana. That covers all our creatures, so let's move on to our instants. Our instant category is going to be pretty sparse in this build, with the first of 2, Disruption Protocol, joining us in the CMC 2 slot, which counters target spell and costs 1 more to cast unless we tap an untapped artifact we control. 95% of the time serving as an artifact-themed version of counterspell since we always have the spare artifacts to tap, and as such providing us with excellent spell disruption to prevent our opponents from messing with our board states or allowing us to disrupt theirs. Then continuing on the counterspell game plan and wrapping up our instance, the CMC 3 slot brings us Stoic Rebuttal, which also counters target spell and costs 1 less if we control 3+ artifacts, again functionally being counterspell in this build for additional spell disruption to keep our opponents from interfering with our game plans. That covers our 2 instants, so let's move on to our sorceries. Beginning in the CMC 1 slot, our sorceries open with a trio of spells that tap our creatures for value, those being Shared Discovery, Battle at the Bridge, and Swallow Whole. Shared Discovery has us tap 4 untapped creatures we control to draw 3, our commander effectively turning this into an Ancestral Recall thanks to his untap effect, which needless to say is a very efficient way to replenish our hands that works perfectly with our game plan. Battle of the Bridge is an X spell with Improvise that has target creature lose -X/-X until the end of the turn and gains us X life, this time allowing us to use our Army of Mirror to fuel a non-destruction removal spell to deal with troublesome creatures and gain a solid chunk of life back while doing so. Swallow Whole has us tap an untapped creature we control to exile target tapped creature, and have the creature we tapped gain a +1/+1 counter, again providing us with additional non-destruction removal to bypass most conventional defenses while further growing a mirror as a bonus. Then from there, it's single entries all the way down for the remainder of our sorcery category, which we start off by jumping to the CMC 3 slot and to its lone entrant, Universal Surveillance, an X spell with Improvise that has us draw X cards, again enabling us to turn our Throng of Mirror into card advantage with no downside thanks to our commander untapping them. The CMC 4 slot then brings us Distant Melody, which has us choose a creature type, then draw cards equal to the number of permanents we control of that type, which, thanks to our large amount of tribe members and our commander's tribal token generation, can easily reload our hands for us under most circumstances. Reverse Engineer then joins us in the CMC 5 slot, which has Improvise and draws us 3 cards, which Urtet and our Mirror turn into a draw 3 for 2 with no downside to keep the on-theme card advantage coming and ensuring we always have spells in hand to cast. And finally, reaching the CMC 6 slot and our final sorcery, we have Austere Command, which has us choose 2 of the following effects: destroy all artifacts, destroy all enchantments, destroy all CMC 3 or less creatures, and or destroy all CMC 4 or greater creatures, making it a very customizable wipe that we can have ignore most of our board while inflicting maximum damage to our opponents, which makes cracking in with our mirror that much easier after the dust settles. That covers all our sorceries, so let's move on to our enchantments. Like our instance, our enchantment category also finds itself with only 2 members, the first of which joins us in the CMC 3 slot, that being Mirrodin Besieged, which, when it ETBs, has us choose either Mirrodin or Phyrexian. If Mirrodin is chosen, whenever we cast an artifact spell, we create a 1/1 mirror artifact creature token, and if Phyrexian is chosen, on our end step, we draw a card, discard a card, and then, if we have 15 plus artifacts in our graveyard, we have target opponent lose the game, which we'll be playing primarily for its Mirrodin mode to get additional mirror tokens into play as we cast our artifact spells, but whose Phyrexian side can still be useful if we draw it in the late game after sustaining losses to snipe opponents out of nowhere. Then our second and last enchantment, Opposition, joins us in the CMC 4 slot, which lets us tap an untapped creature we control to tap target artifact, creature, or land, further weaponizing our deck's tribal token production, tribal untap, and large creature base to continually disrupt our opponent's plays, either by tapping down blockers to enable alpha strikes, tapping down potential attackers to prevent them from swinging in at us, or, if we're feeling particularly mean, tapping down our opponent's lands on their upkeep to prevent them from casting anything for the remainder of the turn. That covers our 2 enchantments, so let's move on to our artifacts. Opening in the CMC 1 slot, its first half brings us Soul Ring, which we can tap for 2 colorless, which of course will be running in this build as a solid ramp source that speeds up our primarily colorless deck considerably. Its second half then adds Springleaf Drum to our arsenal, which we can tap and tap an untapped creature we control to produce a mana of any color, effectively turning any of our mirror into an arcane signet for a turn, which provides us with both additional ramp and fixing that synergizes perfectly with our game plan of tapping down our mirror for value. The CMC 2 slot then continues on the ramp game plan with its first entrant, Arcane Signet, which we can tap for a mana of any color, like the previous entry, providing us with even more cheap ramp and fixing, which goes a long way to help us cast our multi-pip spells and activate our commander's ability. Then briefly moving away from ramp to close out this slot, we have Genesis Chamber, which, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, so long as Genesis Chamber is untapped, has that creature's controller create a 1/1 mirror artifact creature token, making it another cheap way for us to create additional mirror alongside our commander as we summon and resummon our mirror that, while symmetrical, we can make less so thanks to the handful of artifact tapping effects we're running to prevent our opponents from benefiting from it. We then return to ramp as we enter the CMC 3 slot with its 2 entrants, Chromatic Lantern and Mirror Reservoir. Chromatic Lantern taps for any color and allows all our lands to tap for any color as well, serving as yet another rock to help speed up our mana base as well as providing perfect fixing for our land base, ensuring we always have the color of mana we need to activate our commander or cast our spells even if we fail to draw into the appropriate lands. Mirror Reservoir taps for 2 colorless, which we can only spend on mirror spells and abilities, in addition to letting us pay 3 and tap it to return target mirror card from our graveyard back to hand, effectively making it a tribal worn power stone to help us get more mirror into play faster and make use of their activated abilities more often, and whose tribal graveyard recursion is a nice bonus on top of that to ensure we can get our mirror back to recast and reproc our payoffs as we lose them. We then come to a pair of creature bouncing artifacts as we reach the back half of this slot, those being Crystal Shard and Portal of Sanctuary, both of which we can tap to return target creature back to its owner's hand, the former costing 3 or a blue to do this and can be prevented by the creature's controller if they pay 1, and the latter costing a blue can only target our creatures and we can only activate it on our turn, each allowing us to cheaply return our low-cost mirror that haven't been powered up by our commander back to hand to be recast again and re-trigger him along with all our other artifact and tribal payoffs, with the former also being usable as cheeky removal if an opponent is completely tapped out. Erratic Portal then gets slotted in as another bounce effect as we proceed to the CMC4 slot, which lets us pay 1 and tap it to return target creature to its owner's hand unless its controller pays 1, making it a slightly more expensive crystal shard that takes mana of any color to activate and can still be used as removal against tapped out opponents, making it still well worth running. Lux Artillery then wraps up this 2-entry slot, which gives all artifact creature spells we control Sunburst, and, on our end step, if we have 30 plus counters among artifacts and creatures we control, deals 10 damage to each opponent, normally doubling most of our Mirror stat blocks as they come into play thanks to Sunburst, and, once our commander starts loading up our Mirror with counters, puts most opponents on a 4-turn clock with its potent AoE burn effect. And lastly, reaching the CMC5 slot, we have Mirror Turbine and Mirror Matrix wrapping up our artifacts. Mirror Turbine lets us either tap it to create a 1/1 Mirror artifact creature token, or tap it and tap 5 untapped Mirror we control to search our deck for a Mirror card, reveal it, and put it onto the battlefield. Its on-tap tribal token generation being nice to build up our board, but its main draw being allowing us to use our Mirror to tutor up our most powerful tribe members directly into play at no mana cost. Mirror Matrix is indestructible, grants all Mirror +1/+1, and lets us pay 5 to create a 1/1 Mirror artifact creature token, serving as a tribal anthem that also doubles as a mana sink to create even more tribe members and artifacts, which slots into the build as another nice, if overcosted and overpriced, piece of Mirror support. That covers all our artifacts, so let's move on to our Planeswalkers. Our singular Planeswalker will be joining us in the CMC4 slot, that being Saheeli Filigree Master, who comes into play with 3 loyalty and has the following abilities. Her +1 lets us scry 1, then gives us the option to tap an untapped artifact we control to draw a card. Her -2 creates 2 1/1 Thopters with flying that gain haste until the end of the turn, and her -4 gives us an emblem that grants all artifact creatures we control +1/+1 and makes all our artifact spells cost 1 less to cast. Her +1 and easy to reach ult, making her well worth running for the artifact-themed card advantage ramp and anthem she provides, and even her -2 being occasionally useful to get us extra evasive bodies on board if we need them to screen flying attackers or push in for a bit of extra damage. That covers our lone Planeswalker, so let's move on to our land base. Starting with our mana lands, we'll be running Command Tower, Path of Ancestry, Spire of Industry, Holdout Settlement, and Survivor's Enchantment, all of which can tap for any of our colors to help us fix our mana base and allow us to get to Urtet's ability more reliably. Exotic Orchard as another means of fixing that can get the colors we need off our opponent's lands. Power Depot as an artifact-specific source of fixing, which is fine since the vast majority of our deck is comprised of them. And Crystal Quarry, which serves as a reliable way for us to generate Wooburg in the event we find ourselves missing a color or two to proc our commander's ability. Then for artifact lands, we'll be running Mist Vault Bridge, Razortide Bridge, Rustvale Bridge, Silver Bluff Bridge, and Tangle Pool Bridge, which may all be tap lands but make up for it by being immune to most conventional forms of land destruction, synergizing with a decent number of our artifact payoffs, and most of them giving us reliable access to blue mana, which is our most common mana type outside of colorless to improve consistency, making them all well worth running. And lastly, we're running 4 plains, 7 islands, 4 swamps, 4 mountains, and 4 forests as our basics to close out our land base. So, now that we've covered all the cards in the deck, let's take a look at this deck's breakdown. This deck currently has 40 creatures including the commander, 2 instants, 7 sorceries, 2 enchantments, 12 artifacts, 1 planeswalker, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 28 mirror or cards that are considered mirror, 9 cards that can produce mirror tokens, 10 cards that care about mirror, 13 cards that let us tap our creatures for value, 5 cards that let us continually bounce our creatures back to hand, 52 artifacts, and 25 cards that care about artifacts, giving us plenty of tribal support to enable our commander in the form of mirror tokens, and tribal synergies, ways to get even more value out of our commander and our mirror by tapping them down for additional effects, or bouncing them back to hand to be recast and reproc our payoffs, along with a very solid artifact backbone to enable and generate value off of our mostly artifact tribe. For general deck stats, we have 18 ramp sources, 10 card draw sources, 8 targeted removal sources, and 1 board wipe, our ramp package being higher than average in this build since we want to quickly get to our commander payoffs and mirror to generate the maximum amount of value off of them, and our removal and wipes being slightly lower than normal since we're more concerned about enabling our own game plan than disrupting our opponents. Then looking at our mana curve, we have 5 1-drops, 19 2-drops, 21 3-drops, 10 4-drops, 4 5-drops, 3 6-drops, and 2 7-drops, leaving us with a light to mid-weight curve that aims to drop Urtet as quickly as possible, followed by our mirror and artifact and tribal payoffs to build up our board presence and generate value, until we assemble a wide enough board state and the mana necessary to empower it and use it to overrun our opponents. Currently, this deck is valued at $100.42, not counting the price of basic lands or shipping. This price was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. So, now that we've gone over the build, let's go over how you can enter for a chance to win it and how you can unlock additional upgrades for it. So, in order to enter this giveaway, all you need to do is be publicly subscribed to this channel and leave a comment on this YouTube video with the hashtag Grazzet10k giveaway. Then, on April 15th, one randomly selected subscriber comment with that hashtag will be selected as the lucky winner, which we'll be announcing on the following day, and, once their identity has been verified, we'll have this deck in its entirety shipped to them anywhere worldwide. But that's not all, as in order to make things more interesting, as well as incentivize the folks that haven't subscribed to the channel already, we'll be tacking on unlockable stretch goals that will add upgrades to the deck for free for every 100 subscribers past 10k we reach before the drawing on April 15th, which will be included in addition to the deck itself so the winner can mix and match as they see fit, though I will be providing my personal recommendations as far as what to cut for them as we go over them. And lastly, doing things a bit differently from our last giveaway, we'll also be adding unlockable accessories depending on how many likes this video gets over the 4-week period of the giveaway, making the final prize even better the more likes it has and, hopefully, giving the channel a bit more exposure in the process. So, starting with our like stretch goals, if we're able to get this video to over 100 likes, we'll unlock a 100 count pack of Dragon Shield sealable perfect fit inner card sleeves to provide some solid protection against most types of damage this deck may encounter. Then, at the 250 like mark, we'll unlock a 100 count pack of Dragon Shield matte black protective sleeves to bolster this deck's protection even further against any dangers we may encounter at game night. And finally, if we're able to reach the 500 like mark, we'll unlock a Dragon Shield Ness Plus 100 deck box, adding one last layer of protection as well as transportation and style to the deck. Then moving on to our subscriber stretch goals, since we already reached the 10.1k mark, we can swap out Swallow Whole for Swords to Plowshares to add in some more reliable removal to the build. Then at 10.2k subscribers, we'll be exchanging out a Plains and an Island for Ancient Den and Seed of Synod, giving us more artifacts in our land base to further synergize with our payoffs. This trend then continues at the 10.3k subscriber mark, as we'll be cutting a Swamp and a Forest for Vault of Whispers and Tree of Tales to give us even more artifacts in the land base to work with. And then the 10.4k subscriber mark will complete the cycle by terraforming a mountain into Great Furnace, giving us one last artifact in our land base to further fuel our game plan. Then from there, if we're able to hit the 10.5k subscriber mark, we'll be removing Battle at the Bridge and adding Dispatch in its place, adding some more reliable removal to the build to help us more rapidly deal with threats. Then at the 10.6k subscriber mark, we'll remove the draw spell Universal Surveillance and add in the Tutor Whir of Invention in its place, which allows us to precisely tutor up any artifact we want directly into play while still letting our mirror help pay for it thanks to Improvise. Then it's back to lands at the 10.7k subscriber mark, in which we'll be cutting a basic forest and replacing it with the Mycosynth Gardens, which gives us even more filtering to help fix our mana base and, in the late game, gives us the option to use it to gain an extra copy of our most powerful artifact in play. Then to further improve our land base, the 10.8k subscriber mark will see us remove an island to add in Glimmer Void, providing us with yet another land that taps for any of our colors to ensure we always have the type of mana we need for any given situation. Then upon reaching the 10.9k subscriber mark, we'll be upgrading Austere Command to Organic Extinction, which is effectively a one-sided wipe in this build that our mirror can help pay for, only for them to untap themselves and swing in after it levels our opponent's boards. The 11k subscriber mark is then up next, which, if reached, will see Portal of Sanctuary be exchanged out for Unwinding Clock, whose artifact untapping effect each turn will not only provide our mirror with pseudo-vigilance, but also allows us to tap them down more frequently to help pay for and activate effects. Then at the 11.1k subscriber mark, we'll be replacing one of our less powerful Mirror Custodian, with the artifact tutor Fabricate, which improves our deck's consistency even further by fetching up the majority of our deck at a reasonable cost. Then, if we're able to reach the 11.2k subscriber milestone, we'll be upgrading our ramp package by exchanging out Enthusiastic Mechanaut for Storm the Vault, which will almost always transform into Vault of Kotlakan on the turn we play it to provide additional fixing or an insane amount of ramp depending on what we need. It's then on to the 11.3k subscriber milestone, which sees some refinement to our draw by cutting Reverse Engineer for Kindred Discovery, which is even better at generating card advantage for us as we cast our mirror spells, create mirror tokens, and swing in with our mirror army. Then at the 11.4k subscriber milestone, we'll go back to improving our land base by terraforming Crystal Quarry into Inventor's Fair, which adds yet another artifact tutor to the build, this time from our land slot, to make it even easier to search up what we need at any given time while also gaining us some life in the meantime. It's the 11.5k subscriber milestone then up next, which, if reached, will improve our draw package by exchanging out Distant Melody for Vanquisher's Banner, which is fetchable by our newly added tutors, provides more potential card advantage as we cast and recast our mirror, and also serves as a tribal anthem to boot. Then at the 11.6k subscriber mark, we'll be improving our land base even further by swapping out a basic swamp for Academy Ruins, which is a fantastic land that allows us to cheaply and continually recur the majority of our deck from the bin, thereby ensuring our artifact threats never stay gone for long. Then, if we're able to reach the 11.7k subscriber mark, we'll be making a huge improvement to our ramp package by cutting Springleaf Drum for Cryptolith Rite, which for only 2 mana turns all our mirror into mana dorks that tap for any color, fixing all our colors from that point forward and generating a huge amount of mana for us to take advantage of. It's then on to the 11.8k subscriber milestone, which, if we're able to crack, will see us add yet another tutor to the deck by replacing Shared Discovery with Enlightened Tutor, which lets us cheaply search up any of our newly added artifacts and enchantments without having to rely on drawing into them. Then upon reaching the 11.9k subscriber milestone, we'll be improving our creature base by exchanging out Belisarius Call for Urza Lord High Artificer, who provides our build with an insane amount of ramp by letting our mirror tap for blue and then serving as his own mana sink to pump that mana into to help us cast more spells. And finally, if we're able to reach the staggering 12k subscriber milestone, not only will you receive my thanks for helping the channel grow so quickly, but we'll also be making one last change to our creature base by scrapping Suntouched Mirror and adding Mondrak Glory Dominus in its place, which not only serves as an anointed procession on a body to double up our commander and other sources of token creation, but we can also make indestructible thanks to said token creation, rendering it immune to most conventional removal and allowing us to benefit from its token doubling effect for longer. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. Firstly, I would like to thank all of you again for having helped the channel reach this monumental 10k subscriber milestone. All your views, subs, likes, and comments on all my videos these past few years have contributed to this achievement, so sincerely, thank you all for having helped us get to this point, as we truly could not have done it without you. Now, since we have no poll this week, just a quick reminder that we'll be closing out the month of March with a Chiscoria Forge Tyrant build on March 25th, then opening the month of April with the Sulfim Mayhem Dominus build on April 1st. Then from there, since the March of the Machine precon deck list should be released by April 4th, I'll be working on the precon upgrades for those to get them up as soon as possible, which may or may not result in precon upgrade guides starting on April 8th depending on how quickly I can get these done. Otherwise, thank you all again for helping us get to the 10k subscriber mark, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to help the channel continue to grow. And if you feel like showing your thanks by keeping me caffeinated while I make these videos, please consider buying me a coffee at the link in the description. And speaking of which, I'd like to thank Yosho for their generous donation. Thanks for the coffee, Yosho, and thank you for supporting the channel. And if any of you would like to support the channel in a different way, feel free to check out the other deck techs floating around my head if you'd like to see the latest builds, or click on the link above for a playlist of all the Cut Rate Commander episodes I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.